Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I'm in Budapest at the moment. Citizenship, especially European citizenship. In a way, the very word is misleading in this context because I think most of us, when we think of ourselves as having a citizenship, we associate it with a particular state or, in a few cases, more than one state. You know, you're a French citizen, a Hungarian citizen, a Swedish citizen, or whatever. But the European citizenship is in many ways, well, a kind of derivative of this, so that there are certain rights, certain obligations as well, which are derived from your country, my country, being a member of the European Union. So already you're doing something at one remove. It's much easier to conceive of yourself as being a citizen of a country than of the European Union, because the European Union feels so remote, and actually in many ways it is. And this raises a number of very interesting and actually quite difficult issues. Politically, well, we in Brussels and Strasbourg always talk about the European demos, the European people who are basically the carriers, the bearers of democracy. Can you have a democracy without a demos? Well, it's a bit tricky, but at the European level, even while, I'm now quoting somebody I've forgotten who once said democracy is Europe's DNA. It's a great line, I wish I'd thought of it myself. But in fact, it's very difficult for the average European citizen to feel that what they're doing, like voting for people like me as a matter of fact, is going to make much of an impact on their everyday lives. Now, there are things that we all have as European citizens. We have Schengen, which means that we can by and large go to any European Union country without a passport. I say by and large because the United Kingdom is exempt from this. Or we can settle in any of the 28 countries, again with some marginal exceptions, work there without a special work permit. We have the mobility. But even that is, of course, being questioned in the case of the United Kingdom again, in the context of the referendum to be held on the 23rd of June. There are various other ways in which a European citizenship sort of functions, sort of operates. Now here I'm talking obviously of my own experience as an elected member of the European Parliament. Each and every adult citizen of the European Union, of course, has a vote for the European Parliament, which takes place every 5 years. In every country except one, you have to be over the age of 18. In Austria, it's 16. There are discussions about bringing it down to 16 at the European level, but that's not going to happen very soon. When you've elected an MEP, somebody like me, then in a way it's up to us to ensure that there is contact, that we do talk to the voters, we do talk to the citizens. I certainly have an obligation, obviously, to be in contact with my Hungarian voters. How much of an obligation I have towards Portuguese voters, let's say, hypothetically, or Finnish voters, who are all European citizens, that's a much more difficult issue. Well, I do go to international conferences, international events, and speak and things like that, but it's not really the same as having a direct relationship. And this raises another issue. Can you identify, I think is a better word, with Europe as a political body and your own country? And the answer to that, I think, is extremely difficult. And this is the explanation for what is generally known as the disconnect. The disconnect between what you're voting for and what you feel about it. You don't really feel, most people anyway, don't feel that they have a very strong European identity. There's one exception to this. If you're in non-Europe, you begin to feel very European. Certainly that's my experience. Go to the United States and you'll find that you have much more in common with other Europeans on some issues than you do with Americans. You may all speak the same kind of English, or you may not, but still there's a certain togetherness which you only feel in what I'm calling non-Europe. Now, there's one particular issue that I'd like to explore here. You may or may not know, but I'm very sorry if you don't know, that there is an institution called the European Citizens Initiative. We call this in European jargon an instrument. many things are called instruments, so I'm going to call it an instrument, the ECI, European Citizens Initiative. This was formulated a long way back at the convention, way back, well, best part of 20 years ago, or no, quite as many as that, in the early 2000s. The idea being that in certain circumstances, a given number of citizens come together and they come up with an idea which is then passed to the Commission, and the Commission says, oh, what a brilliant idea, yes, we'll launch legislation on this. This is the European Citizens Initiative. There are rules. You have to have signatures from 7 countries, and you need at least 1 million signatures to be gathered within 1 year. And indeed, that it should be about something on which the European Commission can initiate legislation. Now, I'm the rapporteur on this in the Constitution Committee of the European Parliament, so I've become an expert on this. Of course, I did know about it before, but I wasn't so intimately involved. And basically, what I've seen is that although the idea is a good one, something like 53 initiatives have been launched. To date, not a single one has been successful. Several have reached their target. They've got the 1 million signatures from the requisite number of countries. The Commission has accepted it, and that's it. It's gathering dust. There's one I have in mind, it's called the right to water, which basically makes it very difficult to privatize water. It's quite an important initiative. The Commission is not doing anything about it. Why? Well, when I talk to the Commission, they say things like, well, of course, we recognize how very important the European Citizens Initiative is, but actually it's a young instrument, and it just doesn't compel us to do anything. It's advisory. And I suppose, we're thinking about it. Then there are other initiatives. The one I'm thinking of is the Minority Safe Pack, which would guarantee certain rights, certain benefits to members of ethnic minorities speaking another language. It's a linguistic right. Well, that the Commission said no, because the rights of linguistic minorities are member state competence. Well, I wonder about this. If you look at the Treaty of the European Union, the so-called Lisbon Treaty, in Article 2, it quite explicitly says about minority rights, but the Commission chooses to interpret this in a different way. The whole issue has now gone to the Luxembourg court. At the first instance, the Luxembourg court says the Commission is right. I must say I expected the Luxembourg court to say the Commission is not right, but, well, we'll see. There is still another level for that to go. Then there are quite a few ECIs which really never got off the ground very far. That's to say, a group of friends said, let's start an ECI. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the money. It's difficult to collect 1 million signatures. And then there are particularities that how do you identify somebody as a citizen? Well, I think there are 28 different ways, which means it's extremely difficult to do this. In my report on the ECI, I suggested that the European Union launch a digital citizenship for all European citizens. Obviously, it's not obligatory, it would be a matter of choice whether you choose to apply for it. Once it's at the European level, of course, it makes it much easier. I can tell you that in Hungary, in order to identify myself, I have to supply my mother's maiden name. I've no idea why this is so. It's an old Hungarian tradition. Maybe it's left over from the Austro-Hungarian period. Who knows these things? They don't have it in Austria, by the way. In Britain, where they don't have identity cards, it's very difficult to identify yourself. So, as I say, the great variety of all the 28 member states. Well, I still have hopes that although so far, by any criterion, the ECI is a failure, that it will be successful, that the Commission will work on it, will recognize its importance. Because if not, every time they turn one down, it creates a fair number of Eurosceptics who say, there's no point in this. And I think that the Commission does actually want the contact between the citizens and the European institutions. So, I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. It's goodbye from me.